The Tonight Show studio was electric that night, laughter echoing, lights blazing, and Jimmy Fallon striding onto the stage with that trademark grin that always means something wild is about to happen. "Did you guys hear?" Fallon began, holding a stack of cue cards dramatically. "Trump just bragged about passing a dementia test, again." The audience burst into laughter before he could even finish the line. Fallon tilted his head, feigning confusion. "A dementia test isn't supposed to be something you brag about. That's like me saying, 'Hey, I tied my own shoes today, twice.'" The crowd roared. Behind him, the screen flashed an edited photo of Trump giving 2 thumbs up next to the words, "I knew what an elephant was." Fallon didn't stop there. He leaned in closer to the mic and dropped the punchline. He says the doctors were amazed. They said, "Sir, most people don't even know what the word person means anymore." The laughter was deafening, but Fallon wasn't just making jokes, he was hitting at the absurdity of political self-congratulation. Then he shifted tone slightly, voice softening. "You know, it's funny until you remember this guy's bragging about brain health while the government's still shut down, people can't fly, families can't pay rent. Maybe the test wasn't hard enough." The crowd clapped, not laughing this time, but thinking. Fallon smiled knowingly, letting the silence breathe before muttering, "Maybe we should give Washington a group test next." Within hours of the broadcast, the clip exploded online, #FallonTest trended worldwide. Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube flooded with short edits of Fallon's smirk as he mimicked Trump. "Sir, can you point to the elephant?" The moment hit like wildfire. Fallon wasn't just being funny, he was voicing what millions had been thinking but hadn't said out loud. The joke wasn't Trump's test, it was the state of leadership itself. Late into the night, news outlets picked up the clip. Some conservative commentators called it another Hollywood attack, while others admitted it was the sharpest satire of the year. One viral tweet read, "Jimmy Fallon just passed America's real cognitive test, common sense." Fallon, meanwhile, stayed silent online, letting the moment speak for itself. But behind the scenes, NBC producers couldn't believe the numbers. "We've never seen engagement like this," one exec whispered. The monologue was replayed across continents, late night in London, morning shows in Tokyo, and reaction streams on Twitch dissecting every line. By dawn, Trump's campaign office reportedly issued a short statement calling Fallon irrelevant, which, of course, only made the story bigger. Fallon opened the next night's show with a grin. "I just want to say, thank you for calling me irrelevant. My mom's been saying that for years." The audience lost it. He leaned forward, that classic mix of charm and edge in his eyes, "But seriously. If passing a dementia test makes you qualified to run a country, I guess I've been overqualified since preschool." The applause shook the studio. Fallon laughed, raised his mug, and said, "America, let's promise ourselves one thing, next election, let's test for humility." Backstage, long after the applause had faded and the studio lights dimmed, Jimmy Fallon sat quietly in his dressing room, scrolling through a flood of reactions. He wasn't just trending, he was everywhere. Clips of his dementia test monologue were being shared by nurses, teachers, and even veterans who said his humor spoke truth wrapped in laughter. One viral comment read, "When comedians say what politicians won't, that's when real news happens." Fallon stared at the screen for a moment, realizing the weight of it. This wasn't just another late-night bit, it had become a mirror held up to America. On his desk, beside his script and a coffee-stained notebook, sat a printed tweet from a government employee who'd been furloughed by the shutdown. "Thank you, Fallon. You made me laugh for the first time in weeks." He picked it up, smiled faintly, and sighed. "That's why we do it," he whispered. For years, Fallon had been known as the nice guy of late night, light, goofy, non-political. But tonight had shifted something. His laughter had carried an edge, his jokes a purpose. The country wasn't just laughing at someone, it was laughing through something, the absurdity, the frustration, the fatigue. Outside, one of his producers knocked lightly. "Jimmy, we're getting calls from every outlet. CNN, BBC, even Fox wants a comment." He chuckled. "Tell them I'm still studying for my dementia test." The room erupted in laughter again, but the truth hung heavy in the air. Humor had become resistance, and Fallon, the man who'd once avoided controversy, had just become the unlikely voice of national sanity. He looked into the mirror before leaving, adjusting his tie, whispering to himself with a grin, "If laughter's the medicine, maybe it's time America took a higher dose." By the next morning, the storm had reached full force. Cable networks couldn't stop replaying the clip. "Jimmy Fallon calls out Trump's bragging in the sharpest way yet," read one headline. "Comedy or contempt?" asked another. But what struck Fallon most wasn't the media frenzy, it was the tidal wave of divided reactions from ordinary Americans. One side called him a hero for daring to laugh at power, the other accused him of crossing a sacred line. Trump's campaign didn't stay quiet for long. During a press event in Florida, the former president smirked and said, "I don't even know who that guy is anymore. Wasn't he the one who cried over bad ratings? Maybe he should take another test, for relevance." Laughter erupted from the crowd, but the tone was venomous. Within minutes, Fallon's phone buzzed with a flood of notifications. Hashtags like hashtag Fallon vs. Trump and hashtag cognitive comedy started trending again. That night, Fallon returned to his desk, knowing millions were watching, waiting to see if he'd fire back. He started slowly, his tone calm but sharp. "You know, I heard someone said I should take a relevance test. I did. It came back positive for integrity." The audience roared. Then, pausing for effect, he added, "And for empathy, but I hear that's contagious." The crowd's laughter turned into applause, echoing with that rare mix of humor and rebellion. Fallon didn't mock Trump this time, he dismantled the moment with grace. Behind his jokes was a pointed truth: America wasn't just exhausted by politics, it was craving sincerity. His show became more than entertainment, it was reflection disguised as laughter. By the end of the night, Fallon leaned back and said softly, "We joke to stay sane. Because when power laughs at pain, the only cure left is to laugh back." The audience stood up, not for comedy, but for courage. The next day, the backlash began to snowball. Conservative pundits accused Fallon of Hollywood arrogance, while right-wing outlets labeled his monologue disrespectful to the office of the president. Online, the echo chamber spun fast, clips were cut, quotes twisted, and context buried under outrage. NBC executives started to sweat. One memo even suggested Fallon dial it back for a few episodes. But by now, the comedian had crossed a line that he didn't want to return from, the line between playing it safe and speaking his mind. And that's when Denzel Washington stepped in. Appearing at a charity event that weekend, a reporter asked him if he'd seen Fallon's segment. Denzel paused, smiled slightly, and said, "Yeah, I saw it. And I saw courage too. Sometimes it takes a clown to expose the king." His words hit the internet like lightning. Within hours, hashtags like hashtag Denzel defends Fallon and hashtag Truth in Comedy were trending worldwide. Fallon, watching from his office, couldn't help but laugh. "Did Denzel just back me up?" he muttered, almost in disbelief. But Denzel didn't stop there. In a later interview, he spoke more directly. "Look, I respect anyone who can make people laugh, especially when it's uncomfortable. Truth hides in humor. And if someone feels attacked by a joke, maybe the problem isn't the comedian." That single quote was replayed millions of times. Fallon's defenders rallied behind him, citing Denzel's words as a reminder of what comedy was meant to do: challenge, not coddle. By the week's end, Fallon and Denzel were being praised together as unlikely truth-tellers in an age of noise. Trump's team, on the other hand, doubled down with new insults, but this time, America wasn't laughing with him. They were laughing at him. Fallon knew the fight wasn't over. But he also knew he wasn't standing alone anymore. Denzel had turned a late-night monologue into a movement, and the country was starting to wake up. Trump's response came fast, and it was pure theater. At a rally in Ohio, his voice thundered through the speakers as thousands of red caps glimmered under the floodlights. Jimmy Fallon thinks he's brave because he tells jokes about me on TV? Weak jokes. Terrible ratings. Sad. The crowd roared, chanting his name. Trump smirked, feeding off the energy. And that actor, what's his name? Denzel Washington? Great actor, used to like him, now he's just another Hollywood phony. Within minutes, clips from the rally went viral. Cable networks looped the footage, social media exploded, and headlines screamed, "Trump fires back at Fallon and Denzel." Fallon, watching from backstage before that night's show, sighed. He looked over at his producer and said, "Guess we're tonight's main course." But instead of retreating, Fallon leaned into the fire. That night, he opened his show with calm defiance. "The president called me weak," he began, "which is funny, because it takes a lot more strength to make people laugh than to make them afraid." The audience erupted. Fallon leaned closer to the camera. "And Denzel? He's one of the strongest men I know. Maybe listen to him for once, Mr. President, he's played enough leaders to know what one should look like." Back in Los Angeles, Denzel was watching. He chuckled quietly, then turned serious. During a later interview, he addressed the chaos head-on. When leadership becomes theater, truth becomes the audience's only hope. His tone was sharp, deliberate. The world noticed. His words ricocheted through every major outlet, CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera. That's when the story shifted. What began as late-night banter had evolved into a national debate, about power, ego, and integrity. Fallon's jokes had become protest. Denzel's words had become scripture. And Trump, once the master of commanding attention, suddenly found himself struggling to control the narrative. The question now wasn't who was right, it was who the people believed. By the following morning, the headlines were relentless. Denzel versus Trump, the battle for integrity. Late-night laughter or political resistance? Even conservative networks couldn't ignore it anymore. Panels of analysts dissected Denzel's quote like it was a prophecy. One commentator sneered, "He's just another actor playing the hero," while another countered, "Maybe it takes an actor to remind America what truth sounds like." Inside the White House, aides scrambled. Trump's advisors urged him to let it go, warning that attacking a beloved celebrity like Denzel could backfire. But Trump wasn't known for restraint. "He wants to talk about truth," he snapped during a closed meeting. "Let's see how truthful Hollywood really is." And just like that, the feud became personal. Meanwhile, Denzel took the stage at a university commencement where thousands had gathered. The cameras were rolling, he knew every word would echo far beyond that campus. "We live in a time," he said, "where silence is easier than courage. Where truth is optional, and empathy is mocked. But remember this, power without conscience is not leadership. It's corruption with applause." The crowd went silent, then erupted into cheers that lasted several minutes. That clip, that single moment, would define the entire debate. Overnight, millions shared it with the hashtag #CourageOverComfort. Fallon showed the clip on his show the next evening, saying, "Denzel said what a lot of us have been afraid to say, that laughing isn't enough anymore." The country was split, but something in the tone of the conversation had changed. For the first time, people weren't just reacting to Trump's words, they were questioning the system that allowed them to dominate everything. Even world leaders began weighing in subtly, praising Denzel's courage and criticizing America's moral direction. The story had transcended politics. It wasn't about celebrity anymore, it was about conscience. And as the week ended, Denzel's message had done what few speeches ever could, it made a nation look in the mirror. By Friday night, the storm had reached its peak. Trump couldn't contain himself any longer. He jumped back onto social media with a barrage of midnight posts. Hollywood hypocrites think they can lecture the American people. Denzel Washington is overrated. Fallon's just bitter about ratings. The words flashed across screens worldwide. But instead of silencing his critics, Trump had only poured gasoline on a fire already raging. Within hours, #DenzelSpeaksTruth and #TrumpMeltdown were trending globally. Late-night shows, podcasts, even European news outlets were dissecting the feud. A BBC headline read, "When Hollywood Outshines Washington." CNN ran a segment titled, "The Actor Who Spoke for a Nation." Denzel's commencement speech had become a rallying cry. The quote, "Power without conscience is not leadership," appeared on murals, protest signs, and across millions of tweets. Meanwhile, Denzel stayed calm. At a press conference for his upcoming film, a reporter shouted, "Mr. Washington, what do you think of the president's tweets?" He paused, then simply said, "When you tell the truth, noise comes with it." The room fell silent. That line alone made headlines across the globe. Trump's advisors grew increasingly nervous. Polls showed a sharp decline in his favorability ratings among moderates. Talk show panels debated whether Denzel's comments had sparked a moral awakening in American discourse. Even former political rivals quietly praised his composure. And yet, Denzel never raised his voice or pointed fingers. His restraint was more powerful than any insult. While Trump ranted online, Denzel became a symbol of integrity in chaos, proof that you didn't need a title to lead, just the courage to stand firm. As the weekend approached, a new narrative emerged: the president fights for power. The actor fights for principle. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. One man was shouting into the void, the other, calmly reshaping the conversation of an entire nation. By the next week, the narrative had fully turned. The media wasn't just covering a feud anymore, they were documenting a cultural shift. Major outlets ran features titled "The Moral Voice of Denzel Washington" and "When an Actor Became America's Conscience." Talk shows replayed his quote like a mantra: "Power without conscience is not leadership." It wasn't just a line anymore, it had become a movement. Across college campuses, murals of Denzel began appearing with words like truth, courage, and integrity. On social media, veterans, nurses, teachers, and students shared clips of his speech, calling him the voice of ordinary Americans who were tired of chaos and lies. A viral post read, "He's not running for office, but he's leading anyway." Meanwhile, Trump was unraveling. His advisors were exhausted, journalists noted his increasingly erratic tone, and even some Republican senators began distancing themselves publicly. "This isn't about policy anymore," one senator told reporters. "It's about dignity." Trump fired back instantly, labeling them traitors and weak. The White House had turned into a fortress of paranoia. During an interview with a global news outlet, Denzel was asked whether he planned to enter politics after all the public attention. He smiled faintly. "No," he said. "My job isn't to play the game, it's to tell the truth about it." That clip alone drew over 50 million views within 2 days. The more Trump shouted, the smaller he seemed. Denzel, calm and deliberate, stood like a pillar amid the noise. His silence between words now carried more weight than Trump's loudest speeches. That weekend, a journalist wrote in The Atlantic, "In a time of shouting, Denzel Washington whispers, and somehow, we all hear him louder." It was a rare moment in American culture when leadership wasn't defined by power, but by principle. The country was listening, not to a president, but to an actor who had somehow reminded them of what truth used to sound like. Sunday night. The world was still buzzing, yet something in the air had shifted. The noise that once filled every corner of political life, the chaos, the insults, the endless spinning, had begun to fade. What remained was an uncomfortable silence. It was in that silence that Denzel Washington decided to speak one last time. He appeared at a charity event in Los Angeles, no press invitation, no grand production. Just a modest stage, a simple black suit, and a microphone. The event was meant to raise funds for struggling families during the government shutdown, but when Denzel took the stage, everyone in the room knew it would become something more. "I'm not here to attack anyone," he began, his voice steady, deliberate. "I'm here to remind us what we seem to have forgotten. Leadership is not about noise. It's about care. You can't lead people you don't love. You can't fight for people you don't see. And you cannot save a nation you no longer respect." Every word landed like a hammer wrapped in velvet. The crowd didn't cheer, they just listened, as if afraid to interrupt a moment that might never come again. Then, after a long pause, Denzel said the words that would echo for years. "Power fades. Truth remains. Choose which one you want to be remembered for." Somewhere across the country, Trump was watching. He didn't tweet. He didn't speak. For the first time in months, he was silent. By morning, the speech had gone viral. Major newspapers ran headlines like "Denzel's final word, the truth America needed." Talk shows played the clip in full, and even political rivals, both left and right, agreed on one thing: something about his tone had changed the atmosphere. In the days that followed, donations to the charity skyrocketed, and a new movement began under the hashtag #TruthRemains. Denzel didn't comment. He simply disappeared from the spotlight, leaving behind a quote, a question, and a legacy. Because sometimes, one man's calm is louder than another's rage. And sometimes, truth, spoken once, is enough to change every Jimmy Fallon. You know, we laugh a lot on this show. We make jokes about the news, about politics, about everything that feels too heavy to carry. But sometimes, the joke stops being funny when the truth behind it hits too close to home. When a leader brags about passing a dementia test, something that millions of families actually fear and fight through every single day, it's not strength. It's denial dressed up as pride. We need leaders who can laugh at themselves, sure. But more importantly, we need leaders who can feel for others. Because at the end of the day, empathy doesn't need a test. It just needs a heartbeat.